Hello and welcome back to the Pretty Serious Bike Racing Podcast. I'm Dane Cash, and this week, as ever, I'm joined by co-host, bike racing analyst, Cosmo Catalano. Cosmo, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Dane.
And for the second week running, Ruth Winter's back on the show. Ruth, good to see you for the second time today. We saw each other riding earlier, although we didn't really realize it until it was a little bit too late.
Yes, good to see you too.
We are here to talk Tour de Suisse, men's and women's. The men's race ended this morning. The women's race just started. We've now seen two stages of that. And lots of things happened in the GC battle on the men's side. And I think the women's race coming up is going to be very interesting. But of course, the thing that we have to talk about, the thing that we need to focus on is the horrible, tragic news from the men's Tour de Suisse. We learned on Friday that Gino Mäder, the 26-year-old Swiss rider on Bahrain Victorious, had died following a crash the day before. The crash occurred on a descent. We know that Magnus Sheffield crashed in roughly the same area. Beyond that, we don't, as of when we're recording, we really don't know much about the circumstances of the crash. We just don't have a lot of information yet about that or about anything that's going to be done to improve safety. So in the next few days, I think we will learn more about what happened and anything else that's being done. But for today, it seems like the thing that we should do is just remember Gino Mäder, memorialize Gino Mäder, who he was as a racer and as a person. He was known as a rider who impacted a lot of other people in a good way during his time. And he was taken far too early, only 26 years old, which is just awful. As a racer, he was someone who was very much on the rise. Won a stage at the Giro a few years ago. He finished as highly as fifth at the Vuelta, really coming into his own as an all-arounder. Starting to show up as a potential GC rider. He achieved a lot as a breakaway rider. Was involved in a thrilling battle with Primož Roglič for a stage at Paris-Nice a few years ago. He was a rider who I think there was a lot to look forward to in his career. Just a ton of talent as an all-rounder and just taken from the sport far too young. Beyond his racing career, though, he was also just a great human being. He donated money for every rider that he beat at the 2021 Vuelta to Just Dig It, and then he followed that up the next season with donating to environmental charities for every rider he beat all season. So that's the kind of the person that he was. It was very dedicated to the causes that he cared about, and really everyone around the sport who talks about knowing him, describes him as being, just a great person, a shining light, within the peloton, and someone who will be missed. We didn't know him very well here at the podcast, but a number of writers around the sport have written some things worth reading about him. There's an obituary over at Cycling News. Kate Wagner wrote something on her Substack. That's Derailer is the name of that. She knew him better than I think anyone else at the Escape Collective. There are things out there worth reading about this person who clearly touched a lot of people during his career. So taken far too soon. And at the Tour de Suisse, they called off the following stages racing. That was stage 6. A number of riders and teams pulled out of the race. Obviously, people were pretty heavily affected by his loss. I mean, his Swiss rider riding on home roads. There was a stage to come that was going to pass very close to where he was from, actually. The organization spoke about how he was somebody that everybody knew at the organization because he was a Swiss rider. A number of riders pulled out of this race. The 7th stage at the Tour de Suisse was sort of neutralized from a GC perspective, and then with 25K to go, riders raced just for the stage win. So really after Friday, it was just the time trial on stage 8 that sort of was left to determine the race. And a number of riders, like I said, they pulled out because they were so impacted by what went on. Now, I said before, none of us really knew Gino Mäder, but I figured I'd at least, ask Ruth as somebody who has ridden in the pro peloton for so long and somebody who knows what it's like to be at a race when there are serious things happening. I'm just sort of curious, Ruth, if you have any kind of thoughts on what it might have been like to be there at this race, because I assume it would have been just a real awful situation for all involved.
For sure. I didn't know him, and my deepest condolences and love to everybody that did and is really feeling the hurt from his loss. I think I've been in a similar situation where I lost a friend, not from a race, but I had to race the next day. Or maybe it was the morning of, actually, that I found out that she had passed away. And she loved racing. She was a racer. And all I can remember is just feeling this want to suffer, because I knew how much she loved to suffer and she wanted to race. And I think from this particular circumstance, for both the men and the women that are racing this week, it's just a really strong reminder of how dangerous the sport can be that we do. And that doesn't mean that it's not amazing and beautiful and brings so much joy and love to do it, just like he loved to race his bike. And trying to harness that versus focusing on the fear can be really, really tough. And I think that comes individually, the emotions to each person individually, and everybody should be respected on how they're going to respond to something like this.
Yeah, I think the organization did about as respectable as a job as they could have done in this situation. It seemed like they listened to the riders and tried to take that into account when deciding whether or not to proceed and how to proceed with the race. And like I said, because it was a Swiss rider, it was somebody that I think, he touched so many lives that were involved in this race specifically. And his Bahrain team the following day, rode a sort of a procession to the line, and you could just see how awful it was for those riders. And yeah, like I said at the start, we don't know much about the details of the crash. We don't know much about what may be done in the future. We don't know whether there are going to be steps taken to improve the safety, either of this race or just in general. So for now, we just feel like we should remind you that Gino Mäder just was taken far too young, and any person in their early to mid 20s who decides that he's going to donate a Swiss franc per every rider that finishes behind him, and somebody that I think the peloton will really miss. And our condolences to everyone affected by this, anyone who knew him and anyone impacted by his loss in any way. And we definitely, our thoughts are with everyone who was close to him. And I'm sure in the coming days and weeks, we'll know more about what happened, and also we'll know more about any kind of steps that might have been taken or might be taken to address the safety issues. And I'm sure that the placeholders and any other podcasts on the network are going to know more in the coming days. So obviously stay tuned for that. We are still going to talk about the race and the rest of the race. We'll try to draw some takeaways and try to assess how things did finish at the Tour de Suisse on the men's side. And of course the women's race just got underway, and lots to talk about there as well. So getting into that conversation, the 2023 Tour de Suisse was ultimately won by Mattias Skjelmose, which was I have to say, a huge surprise to me. I was not expecting Mattias Skjelmose to pull this off. And when I wrote the race preview, I barely included him as a favorite. I mentioned him, but I was not very high on his chances. And I have to hand it to Cosmo for noticing, even after that early time trial, how strong he was. He's a rider who I thought was, he was a great climber, but he showed all week that, this was a coming out party for Skjelmose as an all-rounder, to be able to take the lead, hold on to the lead under obviously incredibly difficult circumstances, being the race leader in a race like this. Rob Hatch said that on the broadcast today, just how how difficult that must have been, being the race leader, the guy in the race lead at this particular event when this awful, awful tragedy happened. Yeah, Skjelmose just showed on every level that I think he's got the composition required to win a big race, and he raced smart as well.
He was super composed. Like, honestly, it seemed like he had kind of a game plan from the get-go. I would not have noticed him if he hadn't finished so well in that time trial, because my primary data point on him before was Flèche Wallonne. But he was even in post-race interviews, he'd kind of, he really showed an awareness of what every single other contender was doing. On one day, he might see, Gall go up the road and be like, well, that's okay. I'm gaining time on Ayuso. I'm matching Remco. And just, it was the ability that he had to kind of take that, like you said, that kind of really terrible burden of being the race leader in a situation like this completely in stride. Like, it never seemed to throw him off. This is as much as good as his riding was, like, his head seemed to me the most impressive aspect of how he came through this race. I will say it felt a reporter asked him kind of a cheeky question about losing time to Gall on one of the earlier stages, and he was kind of on the, he's cooling down on the roller. It's like, well, I feel pretty good about him in the TT, against him in the TT. And then today in the final time trial, passing him on the course was really like a big kind of exclamation point, taking home that GC win.
Yeah, I think Felix Gall is another major surprise of this race because of how well he did. He won a stage. He wore the leader's jersey. The time trial was really the obvious downfall for him. He's just not a great time trialist. He showed that in the first TT, and he emphasized it in the final TT that's really just not his skill set. So I think he made everyone else look better in the TT. But Skjelmose was right up there in the TT, in the final TT. He was 9 seconds off of the win. And again, a discipline that I was really not expecting him to be that good at. And so he won the third stage after weathering the storm of Remco Evenepoel doing what Remco Evenepoel does, attacking, holding on maybe too long, not racing all that strategically. We've seen it a lot. We talked about it on the placeholders a fair bit. So the Skjelmose winning on a steep climb is one thing. To continue to, be that composed through this race, and again, such a unbelievably challenging race to remain composed through, just really impressed me as an all around talent. Ruth, did you get to know Skjelmose in your 1 year of overlap at Trek?
No, not really. I mean, we were occasionally around each other. I was, that's funny. There would be like little different groups of the guys, and sometimes you would intermingle with them, sometimes you wouldn't. But particularly like early season training camps, I think I just noticed he was quiet. He seemed like a pretty hard worker. He wasn't one of the louder classics guys, I suppose. It seems like those personalities is like the climber, quiet, focused group, and not that the classic guys aren't. That just maybe like play their music a little bit louder.
He wasn't honking the bus.
No. So not too much on his character, but I never got a bad feeling or impression from him. Just a guy that wanted to race his bike hard and do his best at training camp. Yeah, and I thought I agree with Cosmo totally. He looked really composed this whole week. It was exciting to watch him, and then just go when he felt like he had it. And that time trial, also surprised. Like, I thought he would pull a good one out, but I didn't think it would necessarily be that good. So that was exciting to see him finish it off with that.
So the time trial is pretty fresh in our minds. I mean, that happened earlier today. To me, I was really shocked at the turn of events between like 10 minutes to go in the TT and the end of the TT. I was pretty convinced Juan Ayuso was going to win this race right up until that didn't happen. Skjelmose did not race. His first split was not great. Seemed like he was losing a lot of time. And maybe in the end that was just him riding within his limits, riding cautiously, knowing exactly how much time he had to give up. And basically for the second half of the race, he did not ship time to Ayuso, who won the stage and put in a great performance. We'll talk about Ayuso in a bit because I was extremely impressed by Ayuso this week. But Skjelmose, again, just composed. He might have lost some time early on in that TT, or it might have looked like he was going to lose a lot of time, but he was fine. He won the race, won the overall.
He weathered those early checkpoints in a discipline that he's not known for, and it's just the confidence and the this is the game plan. I'm going to go out. This is my pace. I'll pick it up at the end. I feel like you almost, putting myself in a competitor's shoes, you almost have to ask if he could have gone harder, because the stage he won, he kind of won in a sprint. He basically just followed Gall and out sprinted him. And other days he let people go up the road and just kind of rode pretty tactically. He opened it up on the Albula Pass descent, but really never looked like he was trying any harder than he had to. And even in the time trial, you could almost say, well, he knew where that GC buffer was. Maybe he could have gotten that extra second to Remco, or maybe he was just like, eh.
Yeah, I would love to have kind of known what was going on. Even just in his ear, I'm kind of curious what they would have been telling him in the car, and whether it was all part of the plan to go out that way and then just kind of pick it up, or what. Because yeah, it was definitely a surprise.
That's what you want. You want to be living in people's heads, right? Like you want to put that stress on your competitors. I'm
very excited for the radios that we're going to be getting during the Tour de France. Hopefully we'll get some sort of information that, I don't know, illuminates situations like these. It'd be great to know what that was, what was being said in the car. I did want to talk a fair bit about Juan Ayuso as well. He's a rider that I think the way that he has time trialed in the past 2 months, I guess, it really tells me that he's the real deal. I think he's the most exciting Spanish GC prospect in a long time. He is a great climber, but he won the Stage 3 TT at the Tour de Romandie earlier this year, and then he won the final TT at this race, also won the fifth stage, the very challenging climbing stage, by almost a minute, using his variety of skills. Finished second overall, couldn't quite take the race lead from Skjelmose on the final day, but he did win that TT, and I think just all around, I think Juan Ayuso he's the next big thing. I mean, he's kind of already here. He's already finished on a Grand Tour podium, but I was sort of thinking today that where it seems like we're in a situation where we have two teams, Jumbo-Visma and UAE, that could conceivably sweep all three Grand Tours. Because I could definitely see Juan Ayuso winning a Giro and a Vuelta maybe, or Pogacar winning the Tour Vuelta double. Certainly seems doable from this team that is just suddenly flush with young talents. Well, not suddenly. They've been this way for a couple of years, but it seems like the team to go to if you're a young rider. All right, so speaking of young riders, I was pretty high on Tom Pidcock's chances at the start of this race. Didn't work out. It was kind of meh.
Very meh.
Yeah, Ruth, I know you agree. Should we be surprised? Do you think what was it? What happened? Why was he not really up there?
I mean, I don't really know why. I guess my own speculation might have been he seems like a pretty passionate wanna-win racer, and maybe this just wasn't on his predetermined list of wanna be up there races. The climbs were pretty hard, but it's not like I guess we haven't really seen him climb in big steep climbs like this yet in stage races, but just overall from the start in the time trial, he was pretty far back already, and I just wonder if he really is this is just training, and I'm not that motivated to try and do better.
I thought it was so weird to see him finishing in 50th, 49th in the opening TT, as there was a mountain bike XCO that he could be winning. He could be putting a tremendous shine on Nino Schurter's record-setting XCO victory. And it was still great feeling to see Nino there, but to have him beat a guy like Pidcock to win that, assuming he would have, there's no guarantee. It just seems so weird to me that he would go from dominant performance in the first World Cup of the season to middle of the pack at a highly ranked stage race, great training, like you said, but I don't know. I would that would frustrate me as a rider. That's the sort of thing that as a web developer, if I get taken off a task that I like and put on a task that I'm not performing well at, it really frustrates me. And I'm wondering if Pidcock has that eyes on the 2025 tour, or if he's maybe kind of wondering what Ineos is really doing with him right now.
I do think the Tour is a big deal for him. I mean, and there were a couple of points, and it wasn't just Pidcock. There were other riders where the broadcast, the commentators suggested, is this just a training move? Which you don't really hear that very often in stage races when somebody goes on the attack. But I know that when Remco Evenepoel went up the road, it was sort of, is this him trying to win the race, or is he just trying to get some training in the legs? You don't usually hear that, but I guess in June with the Tour de France looming, that's something that's on our minds, and there is this gradient of interest in winning this race for sure, where some riders are just here to kind of tune up. I could certainly think of a reigning green jersey champion at the Tour de France who kind of underperformed. I mean, he was in the top 3 on 3 different stages, Wout van Aert. He won the points classification, but he didn't actually win any stages, and I actually thought this is a race where I feel like if he'd really, really wanted to, he could have been a GC, like a legit contender. But again, meh?
Yeah, meh. I don't know. He was there, but he wasn't there.
Yeah. And again, he did win the points classification, so we shouldn't be too critical that he...
But he's Wout van Aert. What's the points classification to Wout van Aert when the stages?
I agree. Well, he is... Points classifications do seem to matter to him. But yeah, I'm thinking he would have wanted a stage far more than a points classification without a stage. That's like the one where if you don't want a stage, it's the worst too. So yeah, Wout van Aert, Tom Pidcock, the classics stars that I expected to maybe be up in the GC. Meh.
I was really surprised we didn't get more of a fight out of the non-GC but non-neutralized stage that Remco won. I really thought there was a group of probably 14 or 15 riders that sort of went up on that first or just after that first KOM point, and I was like, oh, we're gonna get like a serious battle here, kind of like classic style for the last 20K of this race. And Remco took off, and that was that. And I mean, I don't know if we put that in the Remco being weird tactically folder, like going full in on a stage that wasn't going to gain him any GC time. But I thought I saw Wout making a move or trying to match, and it just didn't. I don't know. He, like you said, he seemed kind of meh. But of all the kind of cross-disciplinary riders, I think he's maybe the best dialed in how to get himself tuned up, and ready for a specific event. I know we saw Van der Poel last year at the Tour just completely flat, and Wout, on the other hand, was just absolutely dialed. And I wonder if that's kind of the game plan here. He knows what he needs to do to tune, and he's not going to do anything other than that.
I wonder how villainous he'll be at the Tour this year, because based on the documentary that I've been watching. Hey, listen to the Unchained Binge podcast, where you'll hear all kinds of conversation about whether Wout van Aert is really villainous, whether that was maybe slightly played up a little. Lots to talk about across those 8 episodes.
I have not yet. I just watched Plan B, the episode, and I heard it was a contentious podcast, and I could totally see why, because I had opinions about that episode, so I'm looking forward to see what the team had to say about that.
I know Wout van Aert himself had opinions.
Well, I mean, the whole episode was full of things that I was like, this doesn't make any sense. This is objectively out of sync with reality. So I'm curious to see how the defenders of Plan B defended it.
Well, either way, Wout van Aert didn't win a stage at the Tour de Suisse, but I think he is I'm not drawing any conclusions for the Tour. I'm not drawing any negative conclusions for the Tour about Wout van Aert. To me, it's like, all right, he's pretty good. He's close. By July, he'll be winning stages at the Tour de France again. I think he's good enough to be there. Let's talk about Remco Evenepoel just a little bit. He did win a stage. He won the stage that was neutralized from a GC perspective. He was pretty good in this race. He finished 3rd overall. But I have to say, I thought he was going to kind of run away with it in the GC, and I thought that the biggest challenger was going to be Ayuso. Did not expect Skjelmose to take the race win. Also did not expect Remco to not win either of the time trials. Yeah, he seemed very good, but he just didn't quite seem at his best, and also tactically some question marks. I mean, that the stage where he really had an opportunity to take time with an attack, he just kind of faded and never really challenged. I think he was putting it all, waiting for the time trial, and there was one rider who time trialed better than him, and then Skjelmose was just right there as well.
I was really surprised on the Queen stage he didn't try to get across to that Skjelmose group. I mean, they were right there. It was 5-6 seconds. I don't know if the descent was in his head. He definitely made some comments about the descent. I'm not sure if before the stage, but immediately after, before we knew anything else. And he definitely lost time there. But it was just very much like, he didn't seem like he was a guy riding to win the GC. He was a guy who was like, I'm going to make it over this climb and then figure out what to do next. Like, it was very much, I didn't get the sense that he had a game plan the way I did from Skjelmose and also from Ayuso, who really recovered well from a pretty crummy day on stage 4. Like, he lost almost a minute, somewhere around that, to all the other GC guys, and just kind of brushed it off and was like, okay, what do I need to do to put myself in position to win this race? And almost pulled it off. Yeah,
he went on, like, almost immediately was back to flying on the mountains, and it took, like I said, a win by almost a minute. I think obviously it needs to be said that every rider in this race was going to be heavily impacted by what happened, and anybody who stayed in the race was going to be heavily impacted by what happened. It's just, I don't know how much we can really truly say about form, or just about form, when there are obviously other concerns going on in people's minds for the rest of this race. So there is that needs to be said. I think that's pretty much wraps up what we had on the run sheet, at least for the men's Tour de Suisse. So I think we can move on to the women's side, where the race got underway on Saturday with a time trial on Sunday. The same team won both stages, shockingly. It's a team that they've won a lot, just a bit, actually. They've even won a few races in a row.
Yeah, it's 21 races or something they've won in a row, and like 30, it's 36 or 38. I mean, tit for tat. I don't know how many this year, like enough. So I think it's unsurprising that we saw them be dominant again at the start of this race, both in the road race and the time trial.
The thing that does somewhat surprise me is that it doesn't really surprise me, but it's at least notable, is that they do it with different riders. It's not just Demi Vollering winning everything. They do have quite a diverse array of names on the list of winners this year. It was Blanca Vas who won the opening stage, and I know that the tactics there were a little bit interesting. Ruth, what did you see on that first stage of the Tour de Suisse, Saturday's stage?
Well, we had Elise Chavez off the front pretty early on. It was a really, really short stage. I think it was like not even 60 kilometers long. And she attacked at the first QOM, I believe, and she was away, and she got a pretty solid gap for a while. And it seemed like SD Worx were just kind of like doing what they do, which is let other people work until they have to work. And I don't blame other teams, because it's kind of like, what are you supposed to do? Just not race? But in some world, I kind of want to just be like, well, just don't race. Like, make SD Worx work and let Elise get like 10 minutes, because at some point it kind of feels like it's going to have to be the peloton against them, like SD Worx and then just one huge other team that's not SD Worx. Which, again, isn't really realistic, and it's not really bike racing. So that's not something that's probably going to happen. But then as we got closer, SD Worx like, oh, she still has some time. And then they started really helping and putting riders in there. And at the last, I think, kilometer, there was a corner, and I was really, like, Trek still had a lot of riders. Even, like, Loretta Hansen was still there for them after a hard circuit. She was still riding really well. I think they had 5 riders still up there. And Elisa Longo Borghini attacked around this corner, which caused this split. But then there was no other Trek rider close enough to be right behind if, like, it didn't actually work. And so then all that happened was this kind of little split happened with then Elisa. I think there was 3 SD Worx and Alena Sierra, basically. And Elisa finished, I don't know, not up there. And I think maybe if Trek could come into that corner a little bit more organized, or like had Lizzie kind of like right there, then maybe that could have been a really cool tactic. Like, it made sense. They just needed to be more organized, and you could kind of see the run up to that point that it almost looked like they had 2 lead out trains. It was like SD Worx up the middle, and then a couple Trek riders on the left and a couple on the right. And maybe if they had just been a little bit more together, it could have worked. But
I think if they had gotten a rider onto Vollering and Vash when they started chasing after that after Longo Borghini formed that gap. That could have made the difference because they were. I mean, that was anything to make them think twice about closing that down would have been super helpful. You would have ended up with, if it doesn't get caught, you have Marlon Reusser against Longo Borghini and Sierra in a sprint, which does not usually end well for SD Worx on paper anyway. And if they do bring it back together, they've just the Vollering and Vash have now both done work to tow the second Trek rider up the finale. But it was just, I thought it was really cool. I thought they picked a pretty unlikely spot on the course and just tried something crazy, and it almost worked out. It just, SD Worx is SD Worx, right? Like they had there was no question. There was no hierarchical rank pulling. They just did what they needed to do. And you ended up with Vollering sweeping Vash's wheel in the finale. Like their top rider, they're like the World Tour leader is doing this kind of like crit team, domestique work, and actually ended up taking herself off the podium by celebrating as she came into the line because she's that stoked for her teammate to take the win. Like how it's tough to beat that.
Yeah, for sure. They were just always there. Like they're not always doing something, but they're always there, and it seems like they're always there when it really matters. And I think teams are starting to feel like they have to try something different. Like they need to do something and squeeze something out, which I think Longo Borghini was really trying at that moment, and it was a really good idea. They just kind of didn't utilize the other 4 riders that they had in that bunch by having maybe everybody in position and ready to go before it happened, because if they hadn't done that, Lizzie's proven to be like a pretty decent sprinter, or if they'd been kind of all together, who knows if they could have been at least on the podium for the sprint. So I think that I don't know how they feel about it after the fact, if they feel disappointed, or maybe they did have a plan to be together, because again, you could kind of see them trying to be together. It just didn't form by the time that the moment came. And I think like the moment was the moment, and she either had to try it or she had to not, and she tried it in the end.
I do feel like, Ruth, you've said before that it seems like teams don't work together enough to take on SD Worx, or just all decide to make SD Worx do the work. So maybe they just need to listen more to the Pretty Serious Bike Racing podcast. That to me is a good start, I guess. But yeah, it does seem like it's hard to beat them.
Yeah, I can just imagine being in the meeting though and being like, well, we want to race. We're not going to just wait for them. We're going to do it. We're bike racers. What, are we just going to sit around and let them do it? And I would kind of be like, yeah, maybe we should. But then, I don't know. Then like the rest of the team being like, no, we're going to try. We're bike racers. And yeah, I totally see it. I'm not saying that it's necessarily bad. Part of me does want like the kind of comical situation that would occur if literally nobody did anything until they did something. But who knows if we'll get that.
It's definitely getting into SD Worx's head. Like there was a lot of gesticulating and angry arm waving as they were forced to finally chase. And they're definitely trying to make it not happen. They're trying to make other teams keep doing work that they eventually profit from. And I think people are maybe getting wise. But we'll see.
The time trial that followed that stage, Marlon Reusser took the win. Not that surprising. Demi Vollering took second. I was very surprised that she rode such a great TT, just because we haven't really seen her do that many TTs, period. It's just not been something that she has focused on. Honestly, the Women's World Tour does not have that many individual time trials already. But yeah, am I wrong to have been surprised, Ruth, about the way that Demi Vollering rode? She was just 8 seconds off of Marlon Reusser, who is known to be a very talented time trial rider.
I think that Demi has probably been doing some work on her time trial, just because with the Tour de Femmes coming up, she's going to want to make sure that's pretty strong, and do her best shot there. I don't know that I would have necessarily picked her for second. But we know her strength. We know that she's a super smooth cyclist, and I'm sure that she has been on her time trial bike, kind of looking towards July. So I'm not surprised, or I'm not shocked, maybe a little surprised at the placing, but not at all shocked.
I think it was a good TT for her. The descent at the end, especially. I think back to the Vuelta Femenina and her just blind descending breakneck speed into the fog, and kind of watching her come into the last few corners on that TT. I definitely saw a similar, not like abandon or anything, but just very confident, precise line setting. And I mean, there's seconds out there that you can grab for 0 watts, and I think she picked up a lot of them.
She's a smart bike racer for sure, in addition to being, absurdly talented. And the Tour de France Femme, it does have a TT. The final stage is a time trial at the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift, a time trial in Po. So that will obviously have an impact on the race, where she is, I have to think, the favorite. She seems to me to be the clear favorite to win the Tour de France Femme avec Zwift. So a TT would definitely cap that off pretty well. All right, the race ahead at the Tour de Suisse women. So we've seen 2 stages thus far. There are 4 stages in total. So by the time you listen to this, the race may even be over, depending on when you're listening. But we do have a lumpy stage 3 ahead, and then a lumpier stage 4. No huge mountains really to climb, at least none that are going to have a major impact on the race. So it's just sort of a race where you're going to, I think, be able to have an impact if you are a rider who is, punchy but not necessarily a huge high mountain, alpine climber. That said, Demi Vollering's pretty punchy, so I don't really know what anybody can do. I don't know. Is there anyone else you have your eye on, Ruth, as a potential challenger to the SD Worx dominance in this race?
I think that last time we saw Kenya and Saram race against them, they really did a good job of throwing a bunch of attacks. And I think it would be cool to see, even Trek and them kind of get together and go off of each other, or maybe, they could have had some secret conversations before, just see what they could do to try and time attacks together. That would be cool. I think a lot of the time what happens is there'll be a really strong 5-10 second effort, and then it just kind of immediately dies. But if you have people you see, even if there is one SD Worx or something in that group, maybe not Vollering, but maybe one, you just have already pre-decided that you're going to work together, and it goes. Because I think what can happen is it just gets shut down so quickly immediately, and that there's just no hope for a breakaway anymore at that point. So maybe something like that.
Yeah. I also think, I should say that it's not just Demi Vollering. Of course, Marlen Reusser leads the race. She's on home roads. She won the Etzulia women earlier this year. I think Demi Vollering would be happy to say to Marlen Reusser, hey, this is another one of your races. Go for it.
They seem to play off each other well, not just those two, but just in general, the team. And they just seem to really, really play off each other well, which is why they do so well, because they have so many riders that can win. And I think they all know that, and they all have so much confidence in each other. It really just shows on the bike how they ride. So yeah, definitely a hard bunch to beat, but we'll see what happens.
All right, that's, I think, what we have to say about the Tour de Suisse women. The Wheel Talk podcast will have plenty more analysis. I think they're going to be recording with a little bit more information. So by the time the race ends, they might have the scoop on who won. For now, it just certainly looks like SD Worx is going to keep doing what they've been doing all year. But stay tuned to the Escape Collective Podcast Network and, of course, escapecollective.com for more on that. I think that's it for our Tour de Suisse analysis. At least the men's Tour de Suisse will have a little bit more from the Tour de Suisse women by the next time we record, a week from now. And, of course, the Tour de France is right around the corner. The next show that we do, I think, will be the last before the 2023 Tour de France gets underway, which is pretty wild to think about. So I hope you have a chance to watch the Tour de Suisse women over the next few days. And we'll close it out with just one more moment of remembrance for Gino Mäder, and our condolences as well for all impacted by his loss. We will do what we can to get more information on what happened and everything else surrounding the incident as that news starts to emerge here over the coming days. The rest of the Escape Collective Podcast Network will probably have more to say, but for now, we'll just remember Gino Mäder and the awesome rider and person that he was, and a person who touched a lot of lives around the sport, and particularly in this country that he was racing in. his home country of Switzerland. That's it for this week's Pretty Serious Bike Racing podcast. We will see you next week. Stay safe out there.